On This Week in Enterprise Tech, your smartphone is a commodity. China delivers Orwell in spades. Containers in the cloud changes everything, and VMware One wants to do it all. Twiat on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twiat. This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 288, recorded April 27, 2018. VMware Workspace One. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Home plays a big role in your life. That's why Quicken Loans created Rocket Mortgage. It lets you apply simply and understand the entire mortgage process fully so that you can be confident that you're getting the right mortgage for you. Get started at rocketmortgage.com/enterprise. Welcome to Twiat. This Week in Enterprise Tech, it's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Balazer, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. But of course, I can't guide you by myself. If it's an awfully big world, I'm going to need a little help from my friends, starting with Mr. Lou Maresca, who is still basking in the glory of new fatherhood. Lou, how is our chief... What are you today? The genetic repository.
Yes, I'm turning into a bank here, so we'll see how that goes. Everything's going great. Yeah, my kids actually sleep in 4 hours, and so we're doing really well.
Well, I've heard that after your fifth kid, it's really easy. So you're almost there. You just practice a bit more, and you'll have yourself a full basketball team. Fantastic. Also joining us is Mr. Curtis Franklin, who seems to be in the same place. So, Curtis, is the house hunting going well? Have you narrowed it down to just a couple of mansions?
Well, as of this morning, the house hunting is over. We've actually closed on a new house, and now we get to start the fun of remaking it to be what we want it to be. So sometime in the next month, with any luck at all, we'll start doing the show on this end from the new Sunshine Studio here in Florida.
Well, gentlemen, it's great to have both of you again, and we've got quite a show for our audience. Not only are we going to be doing the blips and the bytes, but we've got a special guest from VMware to talk a little bit about what they can do for mobile security. But as we always do, we have to kick it off with the blips. And it's official, the smartphone has become a commodity item. Now, the smartphones have seen an amazing growth over the last decade, with the number of devices penetrating the market in the billions. However, the rules of the communications technology world are immutable, and it seems that smartphones have run straight into one of the first. Everything becomes a commodity. This past week, Samsung released its Q1 results, and while company revenue is up 20% and profit has jumped an astounding 58%, a deeper reading shows trouble for the mobile market at large. Most of that profit came from the sales of NAND flash parts, while demand for high-end smartphone components, specifically large mobile device OLED panels, has dipped significantly. Combined with similar results from other component suppliers, a rise in LCD screen demand, and both Apple and Samsung seeing lackluster flagship sales, it's easy to see the creep of commoditization. The mobile phone has reached its equilibrium point in development, with the features of a high-end $1,000 phone not much greater than that of an intermediate $400 device. The trend could always reverse if a big player comes out with a killer feature and enough of the other manufacturers rush to copy it, but we might just be at the point where we're happy enough with the devices already in our pockets.
Well, peace may be breaking out all over the Korean peninsula, but North Korea continues full steam ahead in its mission to gather intelligence and generate income for the regime. Now, it's doing this via its notorious nation-state hacking machine, the Lazarus Group, also known as Hidden Cobra, which was recently discovered ramping up a global cyber espionage campaign dubbed Operation Ghost Secret. This new campaign is all about stealing information from organizations in the critical infrastructure, entertainment, finance, healthcare, and telecommunications sectors. Operation Ghost Secret, which has so far been found hitting systems in 17 countries, employs multiple custom malware implants to pilfer information from its targets and attempts to evade detection, and includes a new variant that looks a lot like Destover, which was the malware Lazarus Group used in its massive hack of Sony Pictures way back in 2014. Meanwhile, North Korea's ruling elite, most of whom are associated with the Kim family and regime, and the only citizens allowed to access the global internet, well, in the past 6 months, they've gone all obfuscation in their online activities. As a consequence of them going dark on the public internet, well, we have much less insight into their behaviors, interests, and other social intel.
Now, you've seen sci-fi films that kind of frame up the world where class systems and people are separated based on technology and data, right? Well, if you're not aware, this is actually happening today, and these systems that used to be just sci-fi are actually coming. In 2014, we heard some reports of China developing a social credit system, and this system would supposedly rate the trustworthiness of about 1.3 billion of its citizens. Although there weren't many details back then, this month, there's new information that's come to light. All of you like the credit system we use today, right? Well, this kind of takes it to the next level. By 2020, the country plans to give all of its 1.4 billion citizens a personal score based on how they behave. Instead of the system based on good or bad financial decisions like the credit scores, Chinese citizens will be scored on things like whether they pay their taxes on time, how they cross the street, to what they post online. This new system will also rank citizens on their trustworthiness, including whether they jaywalk, buy Chinese-made products, even whether they smoke in non-smoking areas. Those deemed trustworthy can get discounts on energy bills and better interest rates from banks, and those considered untrustworthy can reportedly be stopped from buying property or even stopped from using high-speed internet. Next week, the program will start expanding nationwide and to more of its citizens, and they will actually start to feel the watchful eyes of Big Brother as China's network of surveillance cameras grows to an estimated 600 million cameras. Take a moment. Think about this. You probably heard about the Golden State Killer who was caught by DNA from relative DNA sites like 23andMe. Well, imagine this data also being used to rate you in the future. The future may be bright, but it's a little scary too.
Now imagine you've got a remote branch. No. I mean a really remote branch. A branch so remote that the only way to get to it requires hours of travel via small plane or a snowmobile. Now imagine that you have to keep a staff at that remote branch and 121 others at all times just to accomplish a rote task twice a day. Now, that's the challenge that's facing the National Weather Service in Alaska. For years, they've tried staffing their stations with 3 employees each so that they can launch a series of weather balloons to measure atmospheric temperature, humidity, and pressure. Twice a day, the employees fill a large balloon with gas, attach a sensor package, and send it skyward. The problem is that they've been chronically understaffed, unable to find enough employees, so they've been moving staff from site to site to site, which means sometimes they miss launches. Staffing and resource management is a familiar problem in the enterprise, but the NWS has a novel solution. Robots. Last October, the NWS installed a $1.2 million auto launcher in Kodiak as a pilot program. The robot automatically filled, fitted, and launched the balloons on schedule flawlessly for 6 months with only a single support staff member. And now they're ready to deploy to 11 other locations by 2020. By using auto launchers, the NWS is able to get past their chronic employee shortage, pay for the auto launcher in savings in just 14 months, and free up employees for more pressing matters. I, for one, welcome our balloon launching overlords.
Engineering and software development has always been known as a good field to go into to make some bank, but data science and AI is starting to surface as the new player in this realm. The Open AI Research Lab, started by Elon Musk, has made public some interesting figures that has people dashing to learn machine learning and AI. OpenAI paid its top researcher, Ela Sutskever, more than $1.9 million in 2016, and Ian Goodfellow more than $800,000 for just 3/4 of the year. For additional context, roboticist Peter Abiel made $420,000 for half of 2016 calendar year after leaving for his job as a professor of University of California, Berkeley. This data is coming from public tax forms since OpenAI is actually a nonprofit organization. Even though people are dashing to the field of AI, what they don't realize is it's actually a fairly complex field, including deep understandings of mathematics. People in the field can specialize in what they call neural networks, complex algorithms that actually learn tasks by analyzing vast amounts of data. They are all used in everything from digital assistants to smartphones, self-driving cars. The reason for the high pay here, well, seems to be stemming from the supply and demand models. A little supply, but skyrocketing demand. There's also a domino effect that when you hire industry-leading researchers and experts to an organization, it will also attract more specialized talent in the industry as well. The cost basis will continue to rise for companies since the pool is still small and the need is so high. If you're looking for a field to go into, AI seems to be a good bet going forward.
Well, the latest Amazon hack has some serious lessons to teach us about internet hygiene. Combine exploits of two of the internet's foundation protocols with a human behavior vulnerability, and you get an attack that can be, well, really successful. That's what happened on Amazon's domain name service on April 24th, and the result is a $150,000 lesson in stacked vulnerabilities. On Tuesday, bogus routes began to getting published to a handful of servers at Route 53, the domain name system for Amazon. Bogus routes sent traffic from there to fake name servers, which then directed those looking for myetherwallet.com to a server in Russia, where some users blew through a series of warnings to answer questions from a phishing app and give up their cryptocurrency credentials. Those users lost the contents of their crypto wallets. Now, there was nothing new about any piece of this. It simply stacked several exploits of existing well-known vulnerabilities in the networking protocols BGP and DNS, each of which, it must be said, have fixes available. Some people have tried to get all panicky about this, but the real lesson's here. When you build out new systems, use up-to-date tech and enforce good internet hygiene on your infrastructure and your users. In that scenario, the only people who lose are the bad guys.
Now, by now, you've probably heard about the arrest of Joseph James DeAngelo. He's the Golden State Killer, a former police officer who terrorized California, suspected of more than 50 rapes and 12 murders. It's a cold case gone hot, a morality tale, a moment of peace for the victims and their families. But it's also a tale of big data and what we leave on the web. As details emerge of the arrest, we've learned that DNA played a big part in the multi-decade arrest proceedings. Investigators had DNA samples from the crime scene, but nothing to compare them with. Of course, when that case was hot, the internet wasn't public, records couldn't be pulled across jurisdictions electronically, and people weren't giving their DNA to private companies for publication on the internet. It's the latter that seems to have caught the suspect. Law enforcement didn't have his DNA. However, they did have access to a public DNA record from a commercial DNA testing company, GED Match, a free open source site that runs on PayPal donations. With those, they were able to partially match the DNA to public DNA sequences from a GED Match user who had uploaded their DNA profile. With that lead, they were then able to look through the family tree of the user to find the people who might match the timeline of the crimes. In a shockingly short amount of time, they were able to narrow it to Joseph DeAngelo. While this is a victory for justice, it should also be a call for us to take stock of the public data on the internet that might link to us. And if this case and Facebook are any measure, it's not just the data that we share that we should be aware of, but the data and the sharing habits of the people who are connected to us. That does it for the blips. Next up, we've got the bites. We got to talk about a very interesting proceeding from Microsoft and containers. But before we get there, let's go ahead and take a moment to thank a sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you like the mortgage process? I mean, if you've ever gone through it, if you've ever tried to get a loan for a home, do you like going to a bank, talking to some rando, perhaps opening up your internal secrets for your financial world, bringing in boxes of old receipts and pay stubs, trying to prove to someone that you're actually worth a loan? Well, if you do like that process, there's probably something wrong with you. But if you're like everybody else and that process sounds horrible, we've got things like Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Now, Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans was developed on this idea that the process, the mortgage process, just wasn't keeping up with the digital world. That's why Quicken Loans created Rocket Mortgage. Rocket Mortgage gives you the confidence that you need when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. Oh, it's simple. It allows you to fully understand all the details and be confident that you're getting the right mortgage for you. It's also convenient. Their trusted partners allow you to share your financial information with Rocket Mortgage at the touch of a button and really on your own terms. There's no loan officer looking over your shoulder. There's no one critiquing the work that you do. One click and your financial history is ready to be looked through. Now, it's also powerful because once they've got that information, whether you're looking to buy your first home or your 10th, Rocket Mortgage is able to perform thousands of calculations in just seconds. And then with that information, based on your income, your assets, and your credit, Rocket Mortgage can analyze all of the home loan options for which you qualify and then find the one that's just right for you. It's Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Apply simply, understand fully, mortgage confidently. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/enterprise. That's rocketmortgage.com/enterprise. Equal housing lender license in all 50 states. NMLS consumeraccess.org number 3030. And we thank Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's go ahead and jump into the blip. And this one actually, the bite. This one actually is a game changer. Now, the data center has always been a great place to see the evolution of the state-of-the-art in information systems. We went from racks of 4U servers to 42U of pizza box systems, from high-density racks to hyper-dense virtual machine clusters and containerized apps, from VM clusters in your own racks to virtualized services in the cloud, and now containers themselves in the cloud. Now, this past week, Microsoft released their Azure container instances to general availability. It's been in beta for a while. Now, it's all part of their Rapid Cloud Container Deployment Service. It allows admins to use a serverless approach for Linux and Windows-based containers, all hosted in Azure. Now, here's how it works. In the old model, you have a virtualized server that handles the entire service. It may contain a couple of containers, dynamically adjusting the amount of resources that it needs to deal with the load at any given time. But in the new ACI model, you can divide the service into different stages of work, with each being a cleanly packaged burst compute module that is billed per second of use and does not require a virtualized machine. Now, the end result is that your costs go down and your response time goes up because of the granularity of the service. Each component can burst to its requirement. And rather than dealing with a bottleneck within the virtual machine itself, the different components can use different amounts of resources, and everything is billed per second. Now, this is interesting. It's not getting a lot of play, but I can't stress enough how groundbreaking this is. Lou, this is really what we've been looking for, right? I mean, you take a process, you divide it into its component pieces, and each one of those pieces uses exactly as much resources as it needs. This is huge. It's a huge departure from what we've come to expect in the cloud.
Absolutely. I mean, you're basically now normal things today are dependent on physical resources. And so when you have, VMs, obviously those are potentially based on physical resources as well. But now when you kind of take that out of the picture and you're saying, I just have this piece of code or this piece of this application that's not physical anymore. It's essentially a logical piece that I can kind of put out somewhere in isolation. I can now run these things in concurrently across many things and be able to scale them out virtually without having to really worry about what the physical resources are there backing it. And I think that's where this becomes like kind of mind-blowing. It just kind of explodes with opportunity and possibilities and potential. And so, even software development is trying to switch into that kind of logical blocking and breaking down of applications.
All right, we've got Specs in the chat room who says he'd like to see the workload management algorithm for that, but that's the point, Specs. Azure handles all of that. You don't have to figure out an algorithm for how much is allocated to each process because it just uses as much as it needs. So, for example, in the traditional model, when you've got a virtualized machine running a series of containers, the issue is that those different containers are going to require different amounts of resources, and you have to expand or contract the virtual machines based on the one module that's using X amount versus 1/10 of X. In this, every single step of the process uses exactly as much as it needs. It can expand or contract based on how much load is being put on it, which means you don't pay as much, and it also means your responsiveness is off the charts. I mean, for the developers, I think that's the key. They're going to love this because they understand that the login screen doesn't need as much processing power as the back end. The back end probably needs a little less power than the graphical interface based on how much that's using. And you can even divide the graphical interface into different modules so that you never have to worry about load. Now, they did release a little bit of pricing information. The containers are built according to how much processing time and memory that they use on a per second basis. Think about that. This is not per day, per hour, per minute. This is per second. This is real dynamic charging. It's $0.00012 per CPU second and $0.00004 per gigabytes of memory per second. So we're talking about less than pennies here. Curtis, the optimization gets my side excited, but I think that pricing will get management excited because now you can just go into a suite and say, look, it's going to work the same way. It's just going to cost you 1/4 of what it used to. They'll get that, yes?
Oh, that statement by itself should get a lot of people truly excited. And the neat thing is that this is, in many ways, just an evolution. You know, I remember the days when you had to order a server that came complete with all of the physical attributes you required, and so you had to figure out how much, as you said, of CPU, storage, memory, everything else you needed. And often, in order to get all of one thing you needed, you had to over-provision something else. Well, as we've gone to the cloud and we've gone to everything as a service, we've seen the granularity increase. And I think this is just the next and truly logical step in that. It can now get truly granular based on individual workloads of the moment. And as you point out, and Lou has pointed out, that makes the cost very, very attractive.
Right. And it's not just the cost. You could also look at this from a security perspective, because when we were running containers inside of virtual machines, the separation between those containers wasn't always perfect. You could break out of a container and theoretically, and they actually were a couple of proof of concepts, get to another container within that virtual machine. Since these containers are running bare, they're not running inside of a virtual machine, there is no opportunity to break out of a container and get into another part of the process. So you can imagine that this could be used as a security measure. If you isolate the individual components that contain different parts of personally identifying information, it means that if one is compromised, you cannot get into any of the corresponding modules, which makes that data much less valuable. But Lou, there's another thing here. I think we've briefly talked about this as we get excited about what's possible, and that is what Microsoft is really doing is they're promoting experimentation. We haven't written services like this before, so now people have to relearn what's the best practices to do that.
Right. I think there's things like AWS Lambda services and Azure Functions. They're essentially you go out and drop some code and you can build these little microservices essentially to kind of run. And again, they're services, meaning you don't have to worry about any of the physical means, the VMs, how they scale. They do that all for you behind the scenes, and they're very small in cost. So like when you go and do these types of things, you don't necessarily have to worry about it. If I want to go experiment and try things out, I just drop some code in there and hit go, and I get to test things out. Doing this to containers is going to kind of unlock that potential that those services have unlocked as well. So now you can build these application components and packages, and you can just upload them and run them in containers and be able to scale them out and test and not really worry about when it comes to experimenting. If I want to write a microservice and see how it scales and see how it runs and see its speed and performance and all of that stuff and how it integrates with my other services, it's really simple for me to do that, and the cost is very low. So it lowers that barrier of entry for a developer to get started and really understand. And then that will also help them learn the process of developing for containers and with containers and get them onboarded to doing that. So I think just the cost basis alone is going to kind of unlock that potential.
Right. Now, Curtis, there's something I want to bring up with you, and that is every time we have a story about containers, people take that as us saying, well, that means that virtualized machines are gone. Absolutely not. I mean, remember, we had VMware on just, 2 weeks ago talking about how you could use containerized, virtual machines to secure sensitive patient data. Now, when we talk about containers running inside of Azure, we're talking about something that's been specifically designed for services. But when we start talking about controlling the data, segmenting the data, monitoring the data, making sure that the data is secure, you're going to have a mixture of containers and virtual machines, right? I mean, we've now gone past that, at least I hope we've gone past that idea that you can only have one or the other. We now have two technologies that work fantastically in the cloud that are dynamically allocated, and there's really no reason to either go with one or the other.
Oh, that's absolutely correct. And at RSA last week, saw a number of different services and products that talked about precisely how the security can happen as data traverses this combination of on-premise servers, the cloud virtual servers, and containers. It goes from, on one side, microsegmentation, basically trusting nothing, where at every step, no matter what that step is, you have to have re-authentication and reauthorization to make sure that it's trusted on both sides, all the way to various mechanisms where the security lives on and follows the data itself. Once again, no matter where or how that data is traversing an application infrastructure. So the security is actually keeping up with these changes and advances in application infrastructure, and I think it opens up a lot of possibilities to both economical and secure computing.
I want to bring one last bit up, and that is the fact that we've heard, perhaps not this type of announcement, but we've heard announcements close to this before that tend to peter out because the company holds on too closely to the technology and no one else wants to adopt it. Lou, I want to bring up with you the fact that Microsoft from the get-go is designing this to kind of work across platforms. They're not doing the typical proprietary technology thing. In the beta, they showed this working with Kubernetes by Google, which, by the way, is a sponsor of the Twit TV network, as well as with Amazon Fargate. And what they were trying to show customers is you can use different cloud resources and manage across them. And it really sort of goes meta with this idea of use every service and every tool as best as it works for the particular thing that you're trying to do, and we just want to be part of that solution. We want to be a good part of that solution, but we're willing to play nicely with others. Is this the web first, service first that Nadella has been pushing so hard at Microsoft?
You know, it's definitely part of it. I think, you know, we're trying very hard. No matter what we do, you know, I live in office land here, and we try that. You know, hey, we don't care what device you use or what environment you're in. We're trying to make it easy for you to use Office as well. And that goes across all the application surfaces and services in general. You know, like you were talking, Kubernetes, Mesos, Docker Compose, Diaz, all of these other services you can use here. And I think they basically are saying, we're not going to control the environment and the tools that you use. We're going to let you use what you're used to using. And we're going to let you customize and do what you need to do with that, so it fits your CI loop and it fits your environment and your tool chain. So I think that this is really, I'm not going to say something new for companies like us, but I think it's just trying to expand our universe so we can know that the services we're actually giving out and supplying to customers are actually going to be used and have longevity and can last for a long time.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your contributions to the Byte. It's always fun to talk about new technology, and well, that announcement actually got me very excited. We covered it on Windows Weekly this past week, and you know, it's amazing because I don't see people getting really excited, and it's a really exciting thing. I'm going to try coding a little bit over the weekend, see if I can jump on the Azure bandwagon. But it's time for us to move to my favorite part of every show, and that's when we bring a guest in, an expert, to share his or her wisdom with the Twilight Right. And we've got a great guest today. I welcome Mr. Jeff McGrath. He is the Senior Director of Product Marketing over at VMware for Workspace One. Jeff, thank you very much for being on This Week in Enterprise Tech.
Hey, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely. We've got you this time. Now, Workspace One, we've heard about it in the blips a couple of weeks back, VMware's initiative, this whole idea that it could be focused on mobile security. But what is it beyond the elevator pitch, beyond what you might hear at RSA being screamed from the carnival barker. How do you describe VMware's unique approach to mobile security?
Well, it's a little bit broader, I think, than just mobile security. VMware acquired AirWatch several years ago, which was one of the leaders in the MDM space. So we've been doing iOS and Android device management security for some time. Over the past couple of years, desktop operating systems like Mac and Windows have adopted MDM frameworks in them so that they can be managed not from on-premise imaging-based systems, through domain join, domain controllers, GPOs, all that, but now through cloud-based distribution of MDM APIs and MDM profiles. So that was one foundational piece, having this mobile/desktop management platform. So the second piece was, we had a virtualization technology, a VDI technology, Horizon, and several years ago we built an identity management capability to allow single sign-on access, to VDI sessions to individual applications. What we did was, as the world started to change and people started to work outside of the network, starting to access, cloud-based applications as well as their internal applications, we began to morph that identity capability towards more of an IDP, an identity provider, so that we could, leverage SAML, OAuth, and other federation technologies to grant single sign-on access, not just those behind the firewall applications, but also to cloud-based services, Workday, Salesforce, and what have you. Basically, we took that identity component out of Horizon specifically and merged it with the endpoint management capability from AirWatch into a single management platform, and that's what Workspace One has become. And it enables basically the management in every device, and for every one of those devices, we can give the user access to any application, cloud-based, behind the firewall, native on the device, no matter what identity broker you're using. We can act as the IDP. We can work with Azure AD, Kerberos, and anything behind the firewall with Active Directory. We can work with Okta, Ping, and all those types of cloud-based IDPs as well. So that's the inherent platform of Workspace One. What we announced recently was an intelligence layer, which we're calling Workspace One Intelligence, go figure, that starts to now acquire a cross workspace data set. So we were taking the mobile and desktop data on the state of compliance of the device from AirWatch. We're taking the access attempts and identity events from the identity layer. We also made an acquisition of a company called Apptelligent about a year ago that did instrumentation of applications. So if you worked with their SDK, you could see, let's say on a given mobile application, I could see what features is this person using, what's the sequence of features through a workflow, are there any bottlenecks or performance issues happening? And so all that application data comes in there as well. And we're able to look across all this data, correlate it, and from a security perspective, as you were asking about, look for specific security issues across that entire landscape. So what kind of at step one with respect to security today, you can look at different patches, CVEs and whatnot, and correlate that against your entire endpoint fleet and identify systems that might be vulnerable to a given in the wild exploit for which a patch hasn't been distributed. And you can actually automate that patch distribution to remediate the vulnerability and eradicate the exploit if necessary. One of the things we're going to be doing in the future is we're working with a bunch of third-party security partners in what we call the VMware Trust Network. Next-generation threat defense companies like Cylance and CrowdStrike, traditional endpoint protection products like McAfee and Symantec, CASBs like Netscope, and we're bringing in their threat feeds into this single data repository to correlate that real-world threat information against the state of these endpoints, to be more proactive and identify potentially vulnerable systems before there actually is an exploit.
All right, let's break down a little bit of that, because I mean, our audience is pretty savvy, and they're going to look at that. They're going to say, okay, that sounds interesting, but I actually want to know how it's going to work. We know that you're cross-platform, so you're going to work on Windows, you're going to work on OS 10, you're going to work on Android, iOS, etc. We know that you have the ability to track individual devices and individual users, and you can also get scores for how that user is using the device. Are they using it securely? Should they have access to certain types of information? We know that you talked a little bit about cross-compatibility with things like Kerberos and Active Directory. So where exactly does the product sit?
Good question. Today, the majority of our customers use Workspace One from a cloud-based instance. That intelligence layer I just talked about is a hosted data lake in our cloud. It's not available as an on-premise solution. So for folks that already own AirWatch or already are a Workspace One customer, they can add on the intelligence capability through a cloud subscription. Okay. So the data resides in the cloud in our own hosted data center that's replicated across sites around the world. In Europe, in Asia, we try to respect country sovereignty and data privacy regulations. So it is really only available as a subscription that you can add on to existing purchases of AirWatch or Workspace One, or that you can buy as a holistic solution with one of our bundles.
All right, but I have to ask, because otherwise my audience will ask me about it, and that is what data is kept in the VMware side of the solution. So it's in the cloud. You do integrate with, say, my Active Directory. Are you going to be pulling user information up into the cloud so that you can use that for authentication? Or I mean, how does that work?
Well, let's separate two things, right? The authentication is occurring at Active Directory. We're acting as the access broker, passing the credentials to them. The intelligence feature that we're talking about, that data store, we're pulling accepted and rejected access attempts and using that information in our data store in the cloud with this intelligence feature. Right, the Active Directory log information, that still stays in Active Directory, or if you have a SIM tool or some other log aggregation tool, we're taking in the events relative to our, acting as the access control broker to these different services, whether it's Active Directory or a federation service or whatnot.
All right, you've talked a little bit about the capabilities, but you've also mentioned this whole intelligence-driven approach. What exactly does that mean? So how does VMware define intelligence-driven, and how does that change how, say, users or devices are authenticated on my network?
So when we say intelligence, right, typically you think about an endpoint team. Your Windows team may be separate than your Mac team. Your Mac team and your Windows team are separate from your mobile device guys, right? Your security team is a whole separate team. No one's looking necessarily at all this data from the IT ops perspective. The security team may have a SIM tool or some other type of correlation engine where they're proactively looking for threats, but oftentimes we see that the mobile team, who was our original customer, and even now the endpoint teams, as we've moved into Windows and Mac, are reactively getting emails from the security team when a SIM rule triggers, for example. So now we're trying to kind of reverse that model where the endpoint team is able to proactively get intel correlated across all this information that we're aggregating across different device events from these access attempts, and let them be proactive in finding, as I mentioned, security issues before. There are other things besides security that we can also look at. I talked about the intelligent instrumentation into these applications. We can see applications that may be provisioned and not deployed, deployed but not being used. We can potentially find issues affecting the functioning of that application. Maybe there's a network bottleneck that's causing an issue due to lack of throughput. We can also look at cost optimization issues. For example, where folks have that deployed application, but they're not using it. Can we reallocate those licenses to somebody else? So we're not only looking at security types of issues, but we're also looking at IT operation and cost as well as user experience.
It sounds like you're starting to get also into compliance there, licensing compliance?
Yes. So we're not going full bore into license metering, but we can look at I buy a number of Salesforce licenses. I provision them to my SEs and sales guides, for example.
Okay, yeah.
I see that a big number of SEs are not actually logging in to Salesforce. Maybe we take those additional licenses that haven't been used for some period of time, and we give the intelligence to that application administrator for Salesforce to reuse those licenses on the next glut of salespeople, and not have to overpay for licenses. Similar with, let's say, iPads and other tablets, right? Oftentimes, folks they are still getting their laptop, but they're getting a mobile phone, they're getting a tablet. If we see that, for example, that iPad hasn't been logged into in X number of months, perhaps we reclaim that piece of hardware and use it for somebody else who just comes into the organization.
Right. A couple of times you've talked a little bit about the proactive security stance of VMware. But another PR buzz term that I've heard is this idea of predictive security. What exactly is predictive security? Is that just another way of saying proactive security, or are you actually, do you have a solution that can look at potential problems that haven't even started forming yet?
We're going to be working with partners, as I mentioned, folks that, we're not a security company in terms of like a threat intelligence organization. We're working with threat intelligence companies. We have open APIs into this data lake, and I referenced them earlier, where at VMworld coming up in August, we're going to be showing the first version of this where we're ingesting these threat feeds and being able to correlate that information. Hey, there's a vulnerability we're seeing. It affects Windows systems that are on this version and this patch level. Proactively identifying those systems that may be vulnerable to that given exploit in the wild while we're waiting for that patch to occur. Maybe there's some type of mitigation that, for example, a Cylance is telling us you can do, shut down this port, et cetera, and we can make those workflows automated. Once that patch does become available, we can alert the administrator and provide a proactive workflow to allow them to push that patch out automatically. Because we own the endpoint, because we can do patching, because we can do updates, because we do conditional access control policies and can adjust the parameters and attributes that drive those policies, right? We can do these things in real time, which traditional security intelligence products that are looking for issues can actually do, right? Because they may not be PCLM, they may be not device management types of solutions. We're working in conjunction with those to leverage their predictiveness to then go proactive to remediate if there is no particular fix and enact the fix when it does become available. Right, we're trying to shrink that window for exploit.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Now, what is this Workspace One Trust Network? That I'm trying to tease out the different PR terms and see how they actually correlate to solutions.
Okay. Fair enough. So the Trust Network is that group of security partners we talked about who we're providing an open API to ingest their threat information, right? So we can correlate that against the state of the whole mobile and desktop fleet, and identify these systems that may be vulnerable to some type of threat activity they're seeing in the wild. Right? So
that would be like Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, Symantec.
Exactly.
Okay, and those partnerships are already announced, correct?
They are all already announced. This isn't under NDA. So.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
Next generation threat companies like Carbon Black, Cylance, CrowdStrike, traditional AV and endpoint protection vendors like McAfee and Symantec, a number of network security guys like Palo Alto, CASBs like Netskope, so a whole variety of folks. Many of them we've already been working with. Back from the AirWatch days, they had a thing called the Mobile Security Alliance. And that was actually, it's interesting, that was an inverse of this type of relationship. In that relationship, we would send the compliance state of the device from AirWatch, because we're checking the compliance state of Android, iOS, et cetera. We would send it to those types of solutions so they can make a more informed decision. Now we're actually taking their threat data back and doing the correlation on our end. So the Mobile Security Alliance, we started that, 3 or 4 years ago, and now we're kind of completely turning that model upside down as we start to try to get into big data in the cloud, leveraging all this information. What's going to be cool is as we have more and more of our customers' information in the cloud, and we already have tens of thousands of customers that use Workspace One and our legacy AirWatch customers using our service as a cloud service, and we do have a significant amount who are on-prem, but probably a majority are in the cloud. We've got a lot of this data already in our data center. And so as we begin to bring more of this together, and we can start to run analytics against the entire install base and start to proactively identify certain behaviors and threats that we're seeing across all of our customers, we anticipate being able to provide this information back to customers that opt in, and where we almost become like a threat feed ourselves.
That's okay. That brings up a couple of buzzes in my brain, because you did mention that VMware is not trying to be a security company. I mean, this is an interesting solution, but you partner with security companies in order to do the proactive security. But they're giving you the threat intelligence. You still have to act on it. So your product still has to be able to take that intelligence and do something with it.
Correct.
Again, I know we're going over ground that you've touched on briefly, but how does it actually do that? So on your side, you've got a list of all devices, of all users, of accounts, what they should have access to. You could also do inventory and licensing tracking, even though that's not really what the product's for. With all that information, combined with the threat information, what action do you actually take? So
let's say we find a Windows endpoint that's vulnerable to an exploit that one of these vendors has identified. Because we are the management tool of the endpoint, one of the things you may not realize is that, I mentioned before how traditional desktop operating systems have put MDM frameworks into them, and we do complete modern management, PC lifecycle management for Windows 10 systems. So we can enact a patch, we can modify any attribute, we can even go down to the firmware and BIOS layer and act like trusted computing platforms, do firmware patches. So if it's an OS patch, a firmware patch, tweaking any attribute or port, for example, on the device, we can make all those adjustments, not just on mobile devices as we did traditionally with AirWatch, but we can also do that on Windows and Mac systems. Similarly, because now we're also acting as the access broker with conditional access policies to all these different application types, we can require, let's say, a step-up in authentication. Maybe if I'm on the network, it just required me to do password authentication into Workspace One to gain access, let's say, to a cloud service. Now maybe it wants me to do some second factor, whatever that may be that your organization is using. Maybe it's an RSA token or something else. Maybe we quarantine the device from the network because we see something and don't allow access. Maybe somebody's calling in from a network that we don't recognize, and we require some other type of multi-factor authentication. We also can do derived credentials, let's say, for a federal employee that's off the corporate backbone at that federal or civilian agency. So there's a number of things we could do on the access side of the house as well to require stricter authentication before we grant that access if we suspect there may be some type of vulnerable endpoint. Okay. Or deny access altogether.
So it's more of a policy-based rather than action-based security.
Well, there are actions that we can take on the endpoint, right? Because we do, again, whether it's patching, whether it's changing attributes or policies on the system and configuration, whether it's enabling a per-app VPN, disabling network access, whatever the case may be, even wiping or bricking the system, whether it's an iPhone or Android or even your Windows or Mac PC, and wiping all the corporate information. So there's a variety of actions that we can proactively take.
All right. I want to go ahead and bring my co-host back in here because they've been chopping at the bit. I've been watching them in the monitor, listening to this. Now, Curtis, this is one of these solutions that's it's been designed to work with everything that's existing in your network. It's not a forklift upgrade. This is something that runs in the cloud, something that adds an extra layer of security and pervasiveness across your networks. What do you think of Workspace One? I mean, we've been hearing a lot of proactive security. We've been hearing a lot of the different capabilities that it has, but it seems to be like the Swiss Army knife of features. What's your take?
Well, I think one of the questions I have with anything that looks like a Swiss Army knife is, to use the Swiss Army knife analogy, how many toothpicks are in there? The features that ended up being bolted on, but that no one really uses. I mean, how many people actually pick their teeth with the little plastic doodah that comes in a Swiss Army knife?
I always lose that part.
that most people do. So the question is, what is the danger with this, that it is overbuilt? I mean, from when you talk to your customers for this product, are a lot of them using, even the majority of features that are available, or is this something where customers tend to buy it and then they cherry pick a handful of features that actually suits their situation, but the only way to get them is to buy the whole big package?
Well, that's a great question. And we have a series of packages from, basic to more advanced, so that customers can get the pieces that they need. If you think about it, we were born out of a mobile device management solution. And so many of our customers, came on board through a way to get enterprise control over iOS and Android devices, whether that was putting on a full device profile on a corporate-owned device, and hey, if somebody does something against policy, I'll brick that device or restrict access. If it's a BYO device, right, what we've started to see is because of privacy issues, a lot of IT departments didn't want to put a full profile on, and so we gave them this really cool Workspace One app catalog that had my cloud apps, my behind the firewall web applications, my native applications, and then brokered the single sign-on access through SAML Federation, through Kerberos, whatever actually needed to be provided. So that with one login to this catalog, I didn't have to log in again to anything else I did. In fact, everyone at VMware uses this app catalog as their entry point every day when they sit at their desktop, and it's just a phenomenal thing. In fact, when our customers see this user experience, they love it and they want it. So what's happened is, as we merge that identity capability, to the iOS and Android management piece, it was a natural way, right? Because, folks were getting email on iOS and Android for so many years, right? That was the killer app, and it didn't change much, right? Even today, how many applications are enterprise customers using, mobile applications on mobile devices? Still very few. You see a lot of sales organizations getting aggressive, right? Getting Salesforce and other sales automation tools, maybe a DocuSign, things of that nature, inventory lookup, right? But we're not all abandoning laptops and desktops and going to iPads and other tablets and just working off of an iPhone. What we've done is really made the user experience very elegant for these organizations that want to do workforce transformation, and really optimize that mobility program to make the mobile experience so easy. That said, managing iPhones and Android devices is really easy compared to managing Windows PCs and Macs that are traditionally on-network managed, imaging provisioned, right? Thousands of GPOs, large Win32 software packages need to be distributed. And so as the operating systems began to get these similar MDM hooks into the operating system, so they could be managed more like mobile devices, now those AirWatch mobile customers began to say, hey, I want to use these Windows and Mac features and get those modern efficiencies, those mobile efficiencies on my PC fleet. And so now all of a sudden, they're using it for a broader set of devices than ever before. And that single sign-on component from the app catalog just moves along in kind, because they love that experience on iOS and Android. And so it's moving over onto Windows and Mac because the customers love it on iOS and Android. The users get a great user experience, and they want to use it on those over devices as well. So when you talk about are lots of features being left in the bag, I think at one point they may have been correct, but we're really starting to see kind of workforce transformation really begin to accelerate. And I have a theory that many years ago, we were all supposed to work on iPads, right? The CEO brought their iPad in, said, IT, give me that email application. I want to get Exchange, so hook up ActiveSync. They got it. They gave everybody a pass. And I think for a number of years after that, when the line of business wanted to say, hey, I want to get everybody using these iPads, let's put these applications on, IT said, whoa, wait a second. We just gave you guys a pass on email. Now we got to go back and look at our security policies around mobile applications. We haven't even thought this through. And this actually took a long time, even for the most secure and progressive enterprises in the Fortune 100. I've seen it take them years to get their arms around, how do I provide mobile security controls to applications that touch either regulated or proprietary or personal, PII type of data, to allow me to put these applications out on these devices. Only just now, really, am I even seeing that that veil start to lift. And I think we're starting to really see an acceleration of this type of mobile application adoption, which is now really causing products like ours to get fully utilized, I think, for the first time. So it's pretty exciting for a vendor like us that has been in the game with AirWatch for almost 10 years. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Jeff, I think so. We talked a little bit about what Workspace One can do for the applications and organization. I think one question that I have, and a lot of people in the chat room actually have this similar question, is a lot of times you have this third-party application, like let's say good examples, like let's say I'm using SAP, and the way I kind of integrate with that application is that it uses Federation, maybe they use OpenID Connect, that kind of thing, and it works when I can go through the browser. But what's the kind of the level? How do I get that integrated into Workspace One? Like, is it what's the kind of the barrier of entry for there? Like, do we have to work with, say, SAP to get that to work? Like, do we have to add some third-party systems to get that to work? Is the catalog that you have, the identity providers that you have, already work for that? Like, what is kind of the process that a person or an app or organization get kind of on board of that?
Oh, so two things. I mean, if you're going to get SAP as a cloud service through your browser, whatever federation service you're using, we can work with and act as the access broker with access control policies between the device and that cloud service. If you're going to use a native app, like for example, you can go to the Salesforce.com, or you can use Salesforce One, the native app on iOS or Android. We can actually provide that same level of access control to native applications using a secure tokenization approach that we've developed that's patent pending. Many of these we also can do it leveraging native containers like iOS managed apps and Android Enterprise. So there's a number of ways that we can provide not just browser-based access to those cloud services, enabling that single sign-on, but we can do the same thing with the native app on the mobile device as well.
We've been speaking with Jeff McGrath. He is the Senior Director of Product Marketing EUC over at VMware, working with Workspace One. Jeff, I think the problem with having a guest for something like this is such an expansive product. It's very hard to squeeze it down into 30 minutes. I think the best way for people to actually see what this can do is to play with it, to try it, to actually test, deploy, and see what kind of information, what kind of actionable intelligence they can get out of it. Is there a place that they can go to find out more, maybe even try the product?
Sure, go to workspace1.com. There's plenty of information online. There are plenty of videos. You can see how it works. You can read all about it. We also have a technical tech zone. We have a technical blog site that has tons of rich information, not only on the management approaches for mobile devices, but also how we've taken those mobile approaches to managing Macs and Windows desktops. But you can also look at how we do some of the technical integrations to Active Directory Federation service, to Azure AD, to folks like Okta and Ping, to Kerberos, to enable all this single sign-on access and act as the conditional access broker, no matter whether the application is behind the firewall and the cloud, native to the device. So I encourage everybody to go take a look.
Fantastic. We appreciate your time, Jeff. And is there a place where they can find you if they're looking for the work that you've done with VMware One? Where would you like people to go?
If you want to take a look at what I've done on Workspace One, you can see the blog site on workspace1.com. Actually go to blog.vmware.com. You can read things I've written. If you want to reach out directly to me, reach out to jmcgrath@vmware.com. I'm happy to answer your question or point you in the right direction if I can.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And again, thank you for sharing your knowledge with the Twilight Riot.
Thank you guys very much. Take care.
Folks, you've done it again. You've used up another hour listening to the best dang podcast in the universe. That's our enterprise podcast. That's according to 9 out of 10 containerized apps. I want to thank everyone who makes this show possible. Of course, to Jeff McGrath, who's been an excellent guest, but also to my wonderful co-hosts, without whom I would not want to do this show. Let's go ahead and start with Curtis. Curtis, moving houses is one of the most stressful things that we do. And you have done it with such grace and aplomb, and you have just been wonderful on the show. So I want to reach out there and give you a big hug. But could you tell people where they can find you and your work, and eventually where you're going to be setting up your new studio?
Well, Padre, they can find me and my work primarily at darkreading.com. I've got some pieces going up there. You can find pointers to that work on my Twitter account at KG4GWA. And starting midday Sunday, you can find me physically in Las Vegas, where I will be at the Interop ITX conference. Doing a lot of things. I'll be helping host Dark Reading's security subconference there. I'll be working with the IoT-based demonstration InteropNet. I'll be covering the show and trying to meet people who are members of this great IT community. So if you're going to be there, do look me up. Would love to have a chance to meet you face-to-face. And next week, if I'm on the show, I haven't looked at the document yet, but I'll be coming to you from Las Vegas. After that, with any luck at all, I get back to my real studio, new and improved.
In a real house.
As they say, in a real house. I'll feel just like a real boy.
Well, I'm sure it's going to be better for your health and for your state of mind to have a place where you can really kick up your shoes. Of course, we also need to thank our, what was it? Chief Progenitor, Chief Genetic Repository. I don't think we're ever going to run out of names for Lou. At one point, he was the big kahuna. But I think next time he's just going to be the dude. Lou, what will the dude be doing over the next week, and where can we find you?
So we're getting really close to build. So May 7th through the 9th, check out all that stuff, build.microsoft.com. There's all the streams. There's things, things like Microsoft technologies and Windows, but there's also UX design and progressive web app development and IoT and intelligent cloud and all that fun stuff. So take a look at all the streams and stuff coming out of that. Of course, my works, dev.office.com. Check all of that stuff, integrating with Office and building your solutions integrating with Office. And of course, you can check me out at twitter.com/LouMM. All the stuff that I'm working on outside of work, my woodworking stuff that I'm doing, I'm going to post on there. So check it out there.
Also, he has a surprising amount of energy for a man who's dealing with his 4th newborn baby. Are you okay, Lou?
Yes, I'm on protein shakes and caffeine, so we're good.
And how much sleep?
I get 4 hour stretches, so I can yeah. So we'll see how that takes me in the next month or so.
I need you to talk to Patrick Delanta here because he will be a new father. They're waiting. I think the baby's actually waiting for them to watch Avengers, the Infinity Wars. But he thinks he's going to be sleeping through the night. So you can set him straight. Lou, Curtis, always a pleasure. You make this show wonderful. I wouldn't want to do it without you. So again, thank you for spending your time with the Twiat Riot. And of course, thanks to you. That's right. The person who comes back every week to listen or to watch. Without you, we wouldn't have a show. You've been with us all these years, and, well, we want to make it easier for you to get your enterprise fix. All you have to do is go to our show page at twit.tv/Twiat. That's TWIET. There you'll find all of our episodes, all the way back to episode 1. And by the way, I think Lou was on episode 3, so he's been part of the show for a long, long time. And you'll find our show notes if you want to know more about a story we talked about in the blips, if you want to see the sources that we quoted in our bite, or if you just want the contact information for the guests that we had on the show. That's the best place to go. Again, twit.tv/Twiat. Also, don't forget to subscribe. This is the best way to support the show. It really is. You can get an audio version, a video version, or a high-definition video version automatically into your device of choice. You could also tell your friends who might be interested in the show to subscribe as well. Again, we need your support to keep being Twiat. Also, thanks to everyone here in the studio who makes the show possible, to Jammer B and to Burke and to Alex, the people who make sure everything works properly, and to Lisa and Leo, who have allowed us to continue doing This Week in Enterprise Tech, and of course, RTD. We call him Shark Boy. Shark Boy, this is normally the time of the show where we ask you some information that was brought up during the show to see if you were actually paying attention. Are you ready for a question? Do you have your mic on?
Yeah.
Wow, that inspires a lot of confidence. Okay, so here's the question. looking at Microsoft Azure and their new deployment service, specifically the one that allows us to put containerized apps in small segments so we can take a service and make it truly dynamically priced and allocated. What is the name of the product that was first revealed during their beta phase, not from Microsoft, that allowed them to do management across platforms?
Rapid Cloud Container Deployment Service.
Very good guess, and I fooled you. I actually put my mouse on that, even though it wasn't the answer.
Wow, okay.
No, you were looking for Google Kubernetes, but thank you very much for trying. Maybe you'll get it next week.
Hashtag sponsor.
There you go, hashtag sponsor. And until next time, I'm Father Robert Ballister, the Digital Jesuit, just reminding you that if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep quiet.